Hello and welcome to Sick Notes. So previously we looked at some of the best and worst CPR scenes in TV and films. Today we're looking at the shocking use of defibrillators. First up, it's the 2017 remake of Flatliners.
I'll be in the imaging scanner. It will take real-time pictures of my brain's hemodynamic activity. You give it 1 minute, and then you bring me back. Make sure that the scanner's recording, because if not, then this whole exercise is pointless.
So I'm not sure the actual background of this scene, I've not seen the movie, but I think they're suggesting that a defib can be used as a sort of on-off switch of the heart. So they'll shock Juno once and she'll go into cardiac arrest, and then shock her again to bring her back, which is pretty ridiculous. I mean, you very much can put someone into a cardiac arrest from electric shock, but there's no reliable way of doing it. Most of the time, if your heart receives a shock, it isn't going to go into an arrest rhythm.
We're good to go.
Hello, brain damage. You'll get brain damage.
Not if you resuscitate me in time. Brain cells can survive without oxygen for at least 4 minutes.
That sounds pretty much true to me, although the huge issue is, if someone does go into a cardiac arrest, there's no guarantee that we'll be able to bring them back. Okay, someone who's young, fit and healthy and who has a cardiac arrest within a medical setting, you know, they've got every chance of getting them back. You know, every chance of getting what we call a ROSC, so a return of spontaneous circulation. But there's no guarantee. She's acting like, again, the defib can be used as a kind of on-off switch.
Clear!
That clear was ridiculous. The whole point of saying clear is to give people a chance to get away from the patient so that they don't get shocked themselves.
Clear!
And this dude literally gives them no time at all.
Clear!
So yeah, we don't do that. We should be checking round to make sure everyone's clear. And actually the phrase we use is stand clear, so people understand a bit more. It's more of a command of what you're doing. So there you have it. Patients in asystole, the flatline, which, okay, you'd expect from the name of the movie, but this is not what you'd expect. If someone did go into a cardiac arrest from an electric shock, they're most likely to be in ventricular fibrillation, which is the squiggly line. And if they use a defib on her to bring her back, that's it. I'm done. The video's done, the channel's done, it's the end. There's no point anymore.
Matter, hurry up.
Calm down. Charge 200.
Wait.
Clear!
Don't. That's it. Okay. See ya. We're done here. This is probably the most common inaccuracy we see in TV and film. People using a defibrillator with someone in asystole, the flat line, and then the person coming back to life. So why is this not accurate? Well, let's use the analogy of a packed sports stadium representing your heart. And imagine each supporter in that stadium is a heart muscle cell. And in a normal heartbeat, the Mexican wave in the stadium, this beautiful movement of all the supporters, represents a normal heartbeat. And that whole Mexican wave is started by a group of fans in one particular area that we'll call the pacemaker cells. Each supporter in that stadium knows when to stand up because of the person next to them. And that creates this beautifully coordinated Mexican wave representing our normal heartbeat. Now I want you to imagine something happens. Let's say the stadium is struck by lightning and the crowd is so shocked that half the supporters kind of stand up and the other half of the supporters kind of cower and sit down. Suddenly our Mexican wave coordination is lost and everyone is just standing up and sitting down whenever they think. This is ventricular fibrillation, or VFib, or simply VF, and this is a cardiac arrest rhythm. Now I want you to picture another scenario. Again, the heart's normal, so we've got our beautiful Mexican wave working normally. This time there's a disturbance in a particular part of the stadium. A group of rogue supporters just all decide to stand up. So suddenly we have two different waves moving through the stadium, perhaps even one in a different direction. Again, our beautiful Mexican wave, our normal heartbeat, our normal coordination is lost This is ventricular tachycardia, sometimes shortened to VTAC or VT. Weirdly, ventricular tachycardia isn't always a cardiac arrest rhythm, because the contractions produced may still result in a pulse. So it's only pulseless ventricular tachycardia that is a cardiac arrest rhythm. Now you can see in both of these circumstances, ventricular fibrillation and ventricular tachycardia, that our normal movement is lost. But the actual supporters themselves are fine. The actual heart muscles are fine. They just don't know when they are supposed to stand up. Therefore, a defibrillator can be used in these circumstances. And picture this basically like a big announcer on the tannoy saying, "Will all you supporters just sit down?" And so the stadium is reset and the Mexican wave starts off properly from the pacemaker cells. However, in asystole, I want you to imagine that the stadium has had like a special offer on beer and all the supporters have drank way too much and they're all asleep and passed out. So in this instance, no matter how many times the tannoy tells them to reset themselves, the supporters aren't responding. In reality, something wrong with the heart muscles stopping them contracting, which a defib isn't going to reset. As you can probably imagine from that analogy, asystolic arrests generally have a much worse chance of ROSC. So that's why we don't use a defibrillator in asystole. It's not going to do anything. So what do? Well, we keep doing CPR. We try injecting the patient with adrenaline to try and wake those heart cells up. And we also try and fix the underlying problem. We do that in all cardiac arrests, actually, and these are remembered via the 4 H's and the 4 T's. But what I did like about this clip, however, was the fact they did do CPR straight away. I like that. We saw that in our last video, because we still need to keep people's brains perfused while we're preparing the defibrillator. So very well done there. Also, the position of the defib here is good. So on the chest and under the armpit as well, although it needs to be applied onto the bare skin and not over the t-shirt as we see here. Next clip. Loads of you requested I watch this epic scene from The Thing. Again, never seen this movie, so let's see what this scene's all about. Nice little pre-cordial thump there. We talked a little bit about that in the last video.
Clear! Clear.
What the hell? It was looking kind of realistic before The Thing. I mean, literally, The Thing came out. And I've never had anything like this happen to me. I always say to my mates that as A&E doctors, we're unshockable. But if this did happen to me, it would be one of the weirder days. Initially, the position of the paddles on the front of the chest here, this is something I've not been taught. You see it a lot in movies, actually. I wonder if this is kind of like a historic thing or just kind of a movie mistake. The position of the pads were much better in the Flatliners clip we saw. Did I show you on Lena? CPR 1 week, and now you get defib this week. Your arm's falling off. So the most common position to put defibrillator pads and paddles on nowadays is the anterior apical position. So the anterior pad goes here, so on the right side of the breastbone, the sternum, and underneath the collarbone, underneath the clavicle here. And then we have our apical pad, and the apex is the tip of the heart, which is in the 5th intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. But we put the pad lateral to that, so the pad essentially goes underneath the armpit, but halfway, over halfway down the chest here. The reason why they get put there is because the charge is more likely to go through the heart that way. If we put the pads on when we saw on The Thing, on the chest wall here, there's a chance that the defibrillator would discharge across just the chest wall here and not actually go through the heart and therefore not reset the heart muscles. The defibs that you see out in the public have adhesive pads, and they have actually printed on the pads where you need to stick them. So you apply them directly to the skin, so make sure you strip the patient, and just in the position that says on the diagram of the pad. So it's kind of a bit silly here that he's defibbing up here and then suddenly he switches to defibbing the abdomen right at the point that the thing comes out so he can eat his hands off. We don't need to defib an abdomen. We never need to restart a liver. Next clip. So from one 1980s thriller to another, let's find out how the defib skills are in The Abyss. People getting stuff ready before the patient comes, that's a really good bit. Obviously, we get pre-alerts in the hospital, and we have a briefing with whoever's going to lead the cardiac arrest about who's going to be doing what. So, you know, pretty well done there. It's a tough scene to look at here. So a cardiac arrest caused by submersion in water, you know, absolutely can happen. When we talked about earlier about the cause of cardiac arrest, the 4 H's and the 4 T's, one of those 4 H's is hypoxia, so a lack of oxygen, which obviously you'd get if you were been submerged like this. The other one as well being hypothermia, so I can imagine it's actually pretty cold here as well. Guys, just, where is the CPR? With people that are preparing everything like this, you'd expect them to be getting on that CPR quick. I really like the fact they've used suction here to try and clear out the airway. That's pretty realistic. But yeah, we need to be doing those 5 rescue breaths and starting chest compressions whilst everything else like the defibrillator is being prepared. So they've eventually got round to doing chest compressions, but I would have liked to have seen that a bit quicker. It's quite hard to watch. And you see here, they're kind of measuring out where to do the chest compression. So this is something that used to be taught, I think, back in the day. So they'd kind of feel for the xiphoid process, so the end of the breastbone, and then feel a certain number of centimeters up and then start the chest compressions. So nowadays we keep it nice and simple. So we picture half of the breastbone and we do the chest compressions right in the middle of the lower half. And as we said in the last video, you can sort of tell if you're in the right position. If it's too soft, you're in the abdomen, so not compressing the heart. And if you're too high up, you just won't be able to compress the chest fully.
Is that right? Is this it?
I got it.
Well, do it!
Breathe.
Come on, Zeppelin.
Clear.
Oh, God. They're just shocking the person without checking the rhythm first. Luckily nowadays, the defibrillators out in the public and probably places like this are AED, so Automated External Defibrillators, meaning they read the rhythm for you and will only deliver a shock if indicated. They also help with timings during a cardiac arrest too.
No, it won't work. You gotta have bare skin or it won't work.
They do mention an interesting point during this one, actually, and that's the concept of arcing. So this is where the electrical charge doesn't go through the patient, but arcs over the top of the patient and can run the risk of shocking people nearby. So to prevent this in this patient, we need to make more of an effort of getting them dry. So in fact, I'd want to remove them well away from the water's edge here. I'd towel them dry and get the people that are involved here slightly further back. It's a bit of a compromise though, because you know that's going to take time, and time isn't on your side in a cardiac arrest. We also need to make sure that when we use the paddles that we press down really hard so we get a good contact there. That also prevents arcing. And also the jelly that you see them put on here, you know, that we see people usually spread the jelly by rubbing the paddles together. That's also to improve the contact to prevent arcing. Arcing isn't something the general public need to worry about, as the adhesive pads that come with the automated external defibrillators make it pretty much unheard of for this arcing thing to happen. But you still need to make sure the pads are applied to directly to the skin, and that the skin is dry, and that no one is touching the patient when the shock is delivered. What is good about this scene is they get the defib on early. I like that because for each minute of delay in defibrillation reduces the probability of survival by a massive 10%. So it's super important to get that defib on early. Next clip, Casualty. For the international viewers who might not know what Casualty is, it's a soap opera set in a hospital in the UK.
Can you hear me, darling? Ollie, you alright?
She's back in VT.
Yeah, there's no pulse there. Okay, let's start compressions then, please. Can you put that side down, please?
Stay with me.
25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. Okay, still nothing. Let's shock her then.
Charging. All clear?
Clear.
Shocking.
So far, This is pretty damn good. Well done to the British TV writers for this one. This patient is in ventricular tachycardia, the rhythm we talked about earlier. There is a possible cardiac arrest rhythm, but did you see what the doctor did here? He checked the pulse, because remember, it's only pulseless VT that is a cardiac arrest. And as we talked about earlier, it responds to a defibrillator. So that's why they discharged the defib on this patient.
Shocking.
Right, let's shock again then, please.
Charging. All clear? Shocking.
Wait!
I mean, that is totally the fault of the person operating the defibrillator. They need to visually check it's clear when they discharge the defibrillator and not have their back to everyone when they do it. But I'm guessing that's why they set this scene in a lift, because normally that person would be viewing everything that's happening, and they force them into this position where a mistake like this is likely to happen. We also don't have our finger on the button to shock while we're doing our check, for obvious reasons, similar to why we have, trigger discipline when using firearms. I like how during the shocks, the oxygen is also removed from the patient. This is again in case of that arcing thing we talked about earlier. So if the shock did arc, it would run the risk of creating a spark and possibly igniting with the oxygen around.
She's in VF. Okay, charging. Oxygen away. Everyone clear. Shocking.
Holy sh**. I thought this was like a bit of a light-hearted comedy scene in this episode, but this is really bad. And she's gone into ventricular fibrillation. So as we said earlier, if we do get an electric shock and it causes a cardiac arrest, it's likely to be ventricular fibrillation. So not asystole that we saw in the Flatliners clip. So again, a really nice touch. They kind of got the rhythm right. And I have heard of lots of case reports of people being accidentally shocked by a defib, but I've never heard them having any issues like this. But it probably has happened, and it totally could happen.
We've been here for 30 minutes, Lofty. She's been asystolic for 20.
They keep trying. Ben, she's gone.
And also we mentioned how we aren't guaranteed to get someone back either. So this nurse is young, fit and healthy, and they're in a medical setting, and even then they've been unable to resuscitate her. And, given those circumstances, you'd think the odds were in her favour. Another really good learning point here is that cardiac arrest rhythms can change throughout CPR. So originally she was in a ventricular fibrillation arrest, but that's degenerated into asystole. So as we said before, a bad sign. They finally decided to stop CPR. Overall, that was pretty damn realistic, if a little far-fetched. Next clip, and on to everyone's favourite cartoon family, The Simpsons.
Clear.
Why are you doing that?
Oh, it's good for the batteries. Now, I'm afraid your son has cracked his coccyx.
I literally don't know where to start on that one. Firstly, we don't shock anyone who is still conscious. You cannot be in a cardiac arrest if you're conscious, because your blood must be getting to your brain somehow. And if we did, it would be extremely painful, particularly if you shock someone in the butt. Last up is James Bond. We saw him doing CPR in the last video, but let's see how he gets on with the defib.
Bond's been poisoned. He's going into cardiac arrest.
It's a bit random that this guy knows he's about to go into cardiac arrest. Clearly, the reason that piece of dialogue is in the scene is to add drama to what's going on. The only thing I can think of that we get back on our initial blood test that would indicate the patient's going into cardiac arrest is something like the patient being very acidotic, or having something like a high potassium. So potassium is one of the salts in the blood, and if that gets very high, that can put the patient into a cardiac arrest. I'm pretty sure, in fact, I know that's not what's going on because I've seen this clip before.
Ventricular tachycardia digitized.
Someone has definitely done their homework here. The ECG that's built into the defib pad shows that James Bond is in ventricular tachycardia. We've mentioned this several times. This isn't necessarily a cardiac arrest rhythm. It can generate a pulse, which must be what's going on here because James Bond is conscious and alert. He therefore must have a pulse. VT with a pulse is still a medical emergency though, as the heart wouldn't be beating very efficiently and it could degenerate into a cardiac arrest. And if the patient is unstable, which James Bond clearly is here, we'd also want to use a defibrillator to try and restore the normal rhythm. But we'd obviously want to give him some sedation first, because as we said, we never shock someone who is conscious, not even Bart Simpson's butt. And it's impossible to sedate yourself and then be able to deliver a shock. So, you know, he's gonna have to do it on his own. What's also really clever with this scene is that he's been poisoned with digitalis or digoxin, so a drug we usually use to treat certain cardiac arrhythmias, and in a toxic dose can cause ventricular tachycardia. Not only that, we see him use an antidote in the form of this blue combi pen. And digoxin does have a reversal agent. I've not had to use it myself and not sure it would work this quickly, but it is called digoxin specific antibody and very much exists.
Bond, don't push the red button yet. Do you hear me? Don't push it yet. His heart's gonna stop. It's only time for one charge before he passes out.
And it makes sense in the context of this scene that they need to give the reversal agent first if they only have one shock in the defib. Because otherwise, if you use that defib shock straight away, even if it did restore the heart rhythm, the digoxin would still be in the blood and run the risk of putting you right back into another funny rhythm. So my advice to MI5 is put a bigger battery in your defibs so you get some more shocks. Overall, pretty unbelievable, but not impossible. Whoever wrote this scene should be very happy with themselves. So there you have it, everyone. I hope you enjoyed my breakdown of these scenes. I'll leave some links below for anyone wanting to know more about first aid, CPR, or how to use a defibrillator. As I recommended in the last video, get yourself on a CPR course because you never know when someone will need you to save their life. Next video, I'm going to be doing choking scenes, so hop on over to my community feed and leave a comment of any scenes from TV and film that you want me to break down. And finally, thank you to everyone that sent me these clips to check out. I'm sorry I didn't get to look at them all, but I really appreciate everyone getting involved in the channel. And as always, I appreciate all the support you guys give me, all the likes, all the shares, all the subscribers. Yeah, you continue to blow me away. You guys really are the best. So thank you so much, and I'll see you soon.